think she came up with was a bone structure that confirmed what I always thought I'd been seeing from the outside, not just at City Hall, but at the school district as well, which is the extreme dominance of the public works construction lobby. You know, the school district, as we head into these terrible times, we're about to fire half the faculty. And yet we are still building new schools as fast as we can. And if you say that to them, that they have, of course, a line and a rationale. But it seems counterintuitive that you would be doing that in such tough times. The city is run very much the same way. The most powerful interest group out there is the group that makes money building stuff. And that stuff is all paid for with debt, with bond debt. The sales pitch for bond elections is always the same. We're going to give you this huge park. It's going to be bigger than Central Park in New York. We're going to have lakes and solar-powered water taxis. It'll be great. And the most it'll cost will be like $25 a year for the average homeowner. So wouldn't you think of it, it's going to be like joining the biggest country club in the world, $25 a year. Isn't that a great deal? And I think most voters, and it's also sold as making this a better city, a more dynamic city. It sounds like a good deal to voters. And in fact, voters in Dallas have always been fairly courageous about saying, yes, we'll go for that. We'll support the bond issue. We'll support the bond issue for the schools. The problem, the fly in the ointment, and this is where Hunt wound up doing her research, is the matter of how you pay off that debt. Let's say we have a 10-cent tax rate, and I forget what it is. I think it's in the 70 cents, but let's say it's 10 cents. The tax rate is divided into two rates, in fact, and this is never explained to voters. There are two tax rates in that 10 cents. There's 7 cents for running the city, the parks, the libraries, the streets, the cops, everything. And there's 3 cents for paying off the debt. So, when you go to the voters and you say, we're going to have this magnificent project, and it's going to cost, it's only going to cost you $25 a year. What you're really saying is that to pay for that, the capital rate, the part of the 3 cents in the tax rate that pays off debt, will need to go to 5 cents in order to pay for this new project. The trick is that the same interests who want us to vote for these bond elections refuse to allow the tax rate to go up. If this were an honest deal and we just said, yeah, we'll pay for the park, that should mean the capital rate's going to go from 3 to 5 cents. If you're not going to do that, if you're going to hold it at 10 cents, then that money, that new money for the park, for the capital rate, has to come out of the operating. You've got to squeeze it out of operating money. And what Hunt found was an amazing picture of that squeeze going on over 10 years. Our, let me see if I can cut to the chase here on her numbers. If you look at fiscal year 2001, the debt was 14% of the overall money. Debt service took 14% of all the money that the city spent. In 2011, debt takes 21%. So that's a 50%, the debt portion has grown by 50%. And if 14 to 21% doesn't sound like much, you have to look at where that money comes from and what you're squeezing it out of your, let's take the library. The library used to be 3% of the budget, the library system. It's now 1%. You've cut it to a third of its share of what it used to be. Take Parks and Rec. It used to be 6%. It's now 4%. Streets have gone from 4% to 2%. So these other parts of the budget are getting squeezed hard to come up with this money that you need to service the debt. So what's the answer to that? The Jim Schutez simple-minded answer would be, well, no more debt. Let's not pass any more bond issues. I called Hunt yesterday, and I tried that idea out on her, and she said, no, that doesn't work. You can't do that. That's irresponsible and impossible. For example, since 9/11, the federal government has mandated that first responders have to have equipment that comes up to a certain standard. We haven't kept up any of our basic infrastructure in this city in the last 20 years. So as it turns out, our police radio system is terribly outdated and doesn't meet any of the specs. So we have to have a new police radio system. That's $100 million. Then we have the issue of the Trinity River levees. The city manager has said that's a $150 million fix. I don't talk to anyone who believes that. Even the conservative estimate is that it's twice that, $300 million. And it could be astronomically more. But let's say it's the three. That plus the police radios, there's a $400 million bond issue. And then you've got to continue to fix streets. And we have a terrible issue that doesn't get much press, which is called internal flooding. It's the old neighborhoods that have storm sewer systems that were built before World War II. And they simply don't work anymore, and they're dangerous, and they've got to be fixed. That's another huge expense. So what Hunt was telling me is that no more debt is not a viable answer. We have to continue to borrow money. So what's the fix? She's come up with what I think is a brilliant idea, and it's brilliant because it's simple. She's gone to the staff and she said, whenever we talk about budget and whenever we talk about debt, you show us what the capital portion of the tax rate is and what the operating portion is. And they won't do it. They're really dragging their feet. It's very politically controversial. Why would it be controversial? Because if you go back to the beginning of this, when you're selling that bond issue, if you're Austin Industries or something, and you want to build the Trinity River project, and you're selling the project, and you're telling people it's only going to cost you $25 a year, you don't want the other shoe in that picture, which is the 2% you've got to go up on the tax rate. You just talk people into the project, oh my gosh, now you've talked them into a tax increase. And the people who want this stuff done don't want the tax increase. So they don't want that picture out there. So what she's saying is put the picture out there. You can't go to people and say, we're going to stop borrowing money. That's not going to happen. But at least tell the voters the full picture. Show them the impact. And if you sell them, maybe that way, if you sell them on the solar-powered water taxes, then you've got to say, oh, and yes, that's a 2% tax increase. I think this is a really important idea. And it's not just numbers and wonkishness. It sort of is a way of outing who runs all this stuff and who pushes the agenda. And if it's people who want us to borrow money, okay, but make sure we know what the money's for and make sure we know what we've got to do to pay off the money. And make sure if you don't want a tax increase, oh, that's a viable position. I mean, that's a legitimate position. Show us what it's going to take out of the library Show us what we're going to have to cut out of the police force or health and human services and stuff. Just show us how it works so that we know how we're paying for this. Instead of this big ad agency schmooze, it's going to be great and it's going to be sort of free. And I say that sounds sarcastic, but I had this conversation as a closing note with a fellow journalist some years ago when I worked for the Dallas Times-Herald. We were talking about one of these projects, and he said, well, we don't have to pay for that, that's bond money. And I said, I don't think, I think you always got to pay for the money. If not, let's all get some. But anyway, that's my 2 bits worth.